Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. My name is Emily Pia, and I work for No Kid Hungry's Center for Best Practices, and really excited to talk about the Community Eligibility Provision today and why this is such a big opportunity heading into the next school year. Some housekeeping information up front. We are all attendees are in listen-only mode, so we can't see you or we can't hear you. But it would be great to hear from you in the chat box. So if you want to chat your name and where you're coming from, it would be great to see where everyone's coming from today. On your Zoom webinar dashboard, you'll find a Q&A box. I've learned my lesson that there's never enough time for Q&A here on these webinars. So we built in a half an hour at the end of today's webinar to answer all of your questions. So please locate the Q&A box, and that's where you should send your questions today. If you put them in the chat box, it's hard for us to queue them up at the end, so please do send them in the Q&A box. Use the chat to share your experiences, if something's resonating or you do something in your district related to CEP that you want to share in the chat. Please feel free to have a discussion there along our webinar. Before we kind of dive into some CEP content, I'm sure many of you have seen that USDA last week extended waivers through June 30th, 2021, which demystifies the back to school season just a little bit more for us. So we're really excited that USDA extended these waivers. And I just wanted to go over these quickly and share the good news and kick us off with some good news here. So USDA extended flexibilities for the school breakfast program, national school lunch program, and child and adult care food program on a nationwide basis. So please check with your state agency about whether or not they're opting into these waivers and how you might use them in your food service. But they extended the meal pattern requirement waiver with an additional flexibility. Offer versus serve in high schools is not required this year for that waiver. The non-congregate waiver, meal service time waiver, and parent-guardian pickup waiver were also extended, again, for those three programs. Flexibilities that weren't extended or have not yet been extended, I should say, just to note for school food service, the activity requirement for child and adult care food program at-risk after-school meals is still required this year, so that has implications if you operate at-risk after school. And these flexibilities were not extended into the school year for the summer food service program. And this really only has implications if we go back into unanticipated school closures and schools want to switch back to SFSP and operate SFSP during those school closures. At this time, the non-congregate meal service, parent-guardian pickup, all of those waivers were not extended for SFSP. So might have implications if we get back into unanticipated school closures next year. But hopefully all of the rest is good news for the breakfast and lunch program and CACFP. So our agenda for today, I'm going to kick us off with basics, and we'll get also into some education funding implications for CEP. And then I'm joined by my colleague Zeta Riker, who's the former school food service director out at San Francisco Unified School District, and she's also a school nutrition consultant for No Kid Hungry and has been doing a lot of work with CEP, implemented CEP in her district at San Francisco, so comes to us with lots of experience, and she's going to share the benefits of CEP. And then we're also joined by Etienne Melchior-Philbin from FRAC, and she is going to walk us through if Zeta and I have sold you on CEP and why you might consider adopting or expanding the program this year. Etienne's going to walk you through where might you go next and highlight some new tools that FRAC has for grouping and financial estimates for CEP. So really excited to have her on and to present those tools. And then we also have Jenny Arredondo from San Antonio ISD out in Texas, who's going to share her experience implementing and operating CEP out there. And then again, we also have 30 minutes for Q&A. So please throw in your questions as you have them into the Q&A box. Last thing, this webinar is being recorded. We will post a recording of the webinar on our website and send it to you via email afterwards along with the slide deck. So before we get into the nitty-gritty details, I would love to invite my colleague Zeta to share a personal story about how CEP supports students, families, and schools, and a story that was a bit of a catalyst for her district to adopt CEP and ground us in this discussion today. Zeta?
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone. So I wanted to just share a quick story, as Emily mentioned, that really, I'm sure will resonate with many of you. While I was Director of Nutrition Services, I was sitting at my desk and I had a knock on my door from my office manager saying she had a very upset parent at the front desk, and so upset that he needed to speak with me directly. Um, he had received a meal charge bill from his son's school. So I told the office manager, send him in. And when he walked into my office, I could tell the situation was really, really stressing him greatly. He had weathered skin and rough hands, but he had clearly dressed up for the visit. He was wearing nicely shined shoes, a tie, a button-up shirt, and combed his hair. And so I said, okay, calm down, take a minute. We sat together at my desk and reviewed the bill. And he shared how he was very surprised by it because he was not even aware that his son was eating at school. His son was in middle school. They had applied for free meals earlier in the year, but had not qualified. So we discussed some options for him and his family. And at the end of the visit, I really just made sure to assure him that at the end of the day, we didn't want his son to go hungry, and we certainly didn't want to have his family going into any further financial distress. And so I sent him back out to the office manager to discuss different options. But as I saw him turn and leave my office and him walk down the hall, I really knew that unfortunately, that would not be the last parent that I would have come and sit at my desk and wring hands with on this issue. So I think it's an important context to think about as we think about our work in general, and especially in the work in the option to implement CEP.
Thank you so much, Veta. And so CEP, as Zeta alluded to, is just that. It's a program that enables schools to provide breakfast and lunch to all students at no cost to them. So CEP is often heralded as the antidote to school lunch shaming. We saw lots of press about school lunch shaming in the past year, and CEP just eliminates the problem of school lunch shaming because there is no unpaid school meal debt. You're not collecting charges from students, and so there's no accumulation of unpaid meal debt, and students never have to worry about not having enough in their accounts as they go through the lunch line, and staff, as Zeta mentioned, don't have to worry about parents calling and worrying about their unpaid meal debt balance or turning away a student because they can't pay, which is never anything school food service wants to do. And so CEP just eliminates that stress for students, for families, and for school nutrition staff. And then students have equitable access to all meals, and that reduces stigma. And just like textbooks and desks, meals become a universal benefit for students, and meal times become a norm. We often see increased participation associated with CEP and CEP schools because it's just part of the day. You eat breakfast, you eat lunch at school, and it's more accessible, and there's less stigma associated with participating in these programs. There's also a decreased administrative burden, which is a huge selling point for CEP. No more school meals applications, no counting and claiming by fee category, no tracking unpaid meal debt and trying to balance that at the end of the school year. And so taken together, the increased participation and decreased administrative burden can really benefit the school nutrition fund tremendously. We've seen lots of schools at different ISPs implement CEP and find that they have more revenue than they expected because of those cost savings and the increased participation. And so that's during a normal school year, probably a little more relevant to this school year. I know this school year there's lots of question marks around what school food service will look like, and participation gains might not be as strong this year, just depending on the models we go back to school with. But taken together, again, this program, CEP, might help school nutrition funds recover from budget deficits, especially when you consider that CEP is a 4-year cycle. And so if you choose to adopt CEP this year or start a new CEP cycle this year, the ISPs, and we'll get into that in a moment, but the ISP at which you start your 4-year cycle with will last throughout the next 4 years. And so you can lock in a benefit now that's good for students, families, and schools over the course of the next 4 years. I do want to mention before we get further, because I know that might seem like a sticky requirement. This is not a requirement that you operate CEP all 4 years. If you choose to adopt this year and you just want to try it out, you can do it for 1 year. And if you, at the end of the year, say, hey, this just didn't work for us, we want to switch back to traditional counting and claiming, you can do that. So you can lock in a 4-year cycle, but you can switch back to traditional counting and claiming at any time. So who's eligible to operate CEP? An individual school or group of schools can operate CEP if they have an identified student percentage of 40% or more. And so the identified student percentage, or the ISP, is the percent of your total student body that is categorically eligible for free school meals. And these students are identified through a process known as direct certification. Students are categorically eligible for free school meals if they are participating, or if a household member is participating in SNAP, in TANF, in FDPR, and in some states Medicaid, which you can see on the bottom right there, which states those are. I say a household member's participation as well, because these 4 categories, to give an example, if I'm a student and I am on SNAP and I have a cousin living in my household who's not on SNAP, my school district can match our addresses through the student roster or the POS system and extend that to my cousin, and we would both be included in the identified student percentage for my school. Students who are also in foster care, homeless, in Head Start, early Head Start, and/or are migrants can also be included in the ISP as identified students. But something to note about these lower categories on the slide here is that their eligibility does not confer eligibility to siblings or other household members. So if I have a younger sibling in early Head Start at my school district, they can be included in the ISP, but I cannot. So direct certification identifies many of these students. Direct certification systems vary by state. So you'll want to check to see in your state which categories here are included in your state's direct certification system and which aren't. For example, a lot of school districts go to their homeless liaison or McKinney-Vento liaison to get that homeless migrant foster care data. Some state direct certification systems include it already. So it's good to check to see what data is not included, because your ISP is how your reimbursement percentage is determined under CEP. And so the more students who are in these categories, who are on these programs that you're capturing in your ISP, the higher your reimbursement can be under CEP. So under CEP, there are 2 categories for reimbursement. There's free and there's paid, and we forget about the reduced price category. So in CEP schools, you take your ISP and you multiply it by 1.6. And that product is the percentage of the meals that you serve that will be reimbursed at the free rate. And then the remainder are reimbursed at the paid rate. So for example, if I'm at a school and the ISP is 55% times 1.6, 88% of the meals that I serve will be reimbursed at the free rate, and 12% would be reimbursed at the paid rate. This 1.6 multiplier is a multiplier that was determined by research that showed that for every 10 students that were identified through direct certification and other means as students that were categorically eligible for free school meals, there were an additional 6 that were not identified. And so this ISP times 1.6 taken together is a proxy for your school's free and reduced priced meal percentage. And again, it establishes your reimbursement claiming percentages under CEP. You'll hear of this magic ISP, this 62.5% ISP that everyone wants, and that is the ISP at which all of your meals are reimbursed at the free rate. And so I want to note here, because there's sometimes a myth that if your school doesn't have an ISP of 62.5%, that it won't be financially viable for you to do CEP, and that's not true. We have seen districts implement as low as 40% and find success with CEP. FRAC has a really great resource. I think it's called Finding Success with CEP at Lower ISPs. And anywhere really from 50 to 60+% schools and school districts see financial benefits to CEP under normal conditions. Again, this year is a question mark, but again, you do not have to have an ISP of 62.5% for it to work for you. A lot of schools can make it work at these different ISPs from 80% on. And I'd be remiss to have a conversation about CEP and not during COVID-19 and not mention that SNAP enrollment is increasing, and that means ISPs are increasing too. In general, there's some locations aren't seeing ISPs increase as dramatically as others, but again, SNAP enrollment, because families are losing income and are struggling more, so many more families are enrolling in SNAP. And that means that those students can be captured in ISPs and thus increase reimbursement for schools adopting CEP. So some examples, there's not nationwide data yet, unfortunately, but some examples of states that have published updated SNAP enrollment data. In Florida, enrollment in SNAP jumped more than 36% between February and May. In Texas, it went up nearly 19%. And this is SNAP applications, but Maryland saw a 417% increase statewide in SNAP applications from March to April. So again, we're seeing this trend more where there's high living costs. So in areas where stimulus checks and unemployment benefits don't help really make ends meet. So you might not see as pronounced an increase in SNAP enrollment and thus as pronounced an increase in ISP if you're in areas where there might be lower living costs and those benefits, stimulus checks and unemployment might be able to bridge the gap. So conducting direct certification as often as possible is really critical right now because SNAP and other program participation is fluid. So families might go on for a month and might drop off. And if you are not conducting direct certification during the month when a family goes on, you might not be able to capture and identify that student and include them in your ISP. And so it's really critical, again, to conduct direct certification as often as possible and keep working with your homeless liaison, early Head Start director to make sure that new students that come in are included in your ISP. And now is a time to lock in a higher ISP. We know that ISPs were falling prior to this school year, but now because of COVID-19, because so many families are struggling to make ends meet, this is a great benefit that you can lock in for the next 4 years for families and for students. And ATM is going to go into grouping a little bit more in the grouping tool that FRAC developed, but I just want to mention here that 40% eligibility threshold can be met by an individual school or by a group of schools within the district. And you can kind of cluster schools in lots of different ways, and this allows you to maximize reimbursement and also to maximize participation by students and by schools in your district. And so there's lots of things to consider when grouping, and the kind of conventional wisdom if you're trying to increase student participation in CEP is to group those high ISP, higher enrollment schools with lower ISP, lower enrollment schools to kind of bring them up towards the higher ISP. But again, we have tools to help, FRAC has tools to help, and they're going to walk through that in a little bit. I know this part's a little bit confusing, but grouping is really sometimes an underutilized component of CEP. And it really can result in thousands of extra dollars of reimbursement just by being strategic of how you group your schools together. I have an example scenario here. This is by no means the perfect scenario, and there's lots of things that kind of, again, go into grouping when you consider participation and how much unpaid meal debt does a school have on average each year. And so again, there are tools that FRAC's going to walk through that will help. But you can see what I meant by that eligibility threshold. School B at an ISP of 35% does not on its own qualify for CEP. But when grouped with school A and C together, it does qualify because that group's ISP is higher than 40%. In this case, it's 58%. I also want to mention that the ISPs are not just averaged together when you're grouping. What you have to do is sum your total number of identified students for the group and sum your total enrollment for the group, and then divide and get that ISP, which you'll use to establish your reimbursement claiming percentages for that full group. So again, you'll get a copy of these slides, and Etienne will go into greater detail later, but just kind of wanted to give an overview of grouping and the opportunities that exist there. We also know that a really big question that comes up is, well, what about Title I funding and education funding? A lot of education funding streams typically and historically have used National School Lunch Program, free and reduced price meals data. So what happens if under CEP you don't have that individual student school meals application and that free and reduced price data? And this question comes a lot from administrators. And so I know this is a question that comes up a lot in conversations, and we have tools that can prepare you for having those conversations with your administrators. And we'll walk through it a little bit here. So Title I funding is federal funding that's provided to districts with high percentages of low-income students to improve academic achievement for all students. And the funding can be used for things like teacher salaries and materials and after-school programs, etc. And Congress allocates Title I funds to state agencies based on census data and the cost of education by state. And then state agencies distribute Title I funds to districts based on census poverty data. So if you take away anything from this portion of the webinar, it's that CEP does not impact the level of Title I funds that a district receives. What CEP might impact is how funding for Title I is distributed within a district. So districts typically use a rank and serve approach to rank schools by their poverty measures, which often historically has used free and reduced price meals data, and then served Title I funds according to that rank. So you can see how when schools in a district either fully or partially adopt CEP, that might have some implications for how Title I funds are distributed. Luckily, many districts have found success operating CEP with little to no impact on how Title I funds are distributed. Again, it doesn't impact the level of Title I funds distributed to a district, only how districts might allocate those funds within the district. So there's a number of poverty measures that can be used for that ranking and serving process within districts. For example, if a school is a district is only partially adopting CEP, so some schools on, some schools not. An example of how you might be able to rank and serve Title I funds to those schools. For non-CEP schools, you might use free and reduced price data, and for CEP schools, you might use that ISP times 1.6, since that's a pretty good proxy for free and reduced price meals percentages, and then rank and serve accordingly. Or maybe you use ISP for every school, or maybe you use ISP times 1.6 for every school, or maybe you use one of these other options or a combination of them. There's lots of ways, and so we encourage you to work with your school business officials, financial directors, to figure out how CEP will still work for your Title I funds. And state education funding is not as clear-cut, unfortunately, because every state does things a little differently, but luckily FRAC has another great resource, which is hyperlinked here, that shows each state's approach to distributing their education funding. It's worth noting that state and local education funding, on average across the country, makes up 92% of elementary and secondary education funding, so Title I only makes up about 8%. So really, the bulk of education funding is coming from more local sources. Some 30 states require CEP schools to administer alternative income forms for distributing that state education funding. The other 20 do not require that alternative income form, and that's kind of to replace the school meals application. Other states, again, use ISP times 1.6 or participation in other means tested programs, or maybe they use census data, something else entirely. So you can click that link if you don't know your state's approach to distributing education funding in your state and see whether or not you might have to administer alternative income forms or not. And E-rate's another one that comes up. E-rate is from the Federal Communications Commission. It's funding for technology and internet services. And they made it really easy. CEP schools can use ISP times 1.6 to apply for E-rate funding. So here's some additional resources on the slide. These are No Kid Hungry resources, CEP. You can visit our CEP page on our website. We have some new resources that just came out last week, which is talking points for school administrators, a template letter to school administrators about CEP. So you can use these to copy paste and reach out to your superintendent and send an email and ask to meet and kind of detail the benefits of CEP and why you're considering adopting this year. There's also a resource for school business officials, so check those out, and my contact information is on the slide. Always feel free to reach out if you need anything or need any help with CEP or have questions about what we presented. So again, really appreciate everyone joining us, especially our speakers here. I'm going to take a sip of water and pass it over to Zeta to talk about the benefits of CEP.
Great, thanks, Emily. That was a great overview of CEP. It's a lot to cover. So I'm going to discuss a little bit more about the benefits and some of the tools that open up to a district if you do decide to move forward with CEP. So some of the points I'm going to be covering at a very high level are some of the challenges and, again, some of the solutions. So obviously COVID-19 requirements, big challenge, low breakfast participation, meal charges, stigma, and then some of the possible solutions to those challenges. So the first one, first challenge I'll discuss is, if you can, next slide. Thanks. And has always been a challenge for nutrition service programs. It has been the amount of wait time in the lunch line. So moving children through the line as efficiently as possible will continue to be a priority for next school year, and even more so with the required COVID-19 sanitary protocols. So at most schools, you may use meal cards, student pins, or PhotoServe where they're touching the POS screen to record information. So how are we going to record student information and not spread germs? How are we going to not have the meal line take even longer with COVID-19? So with the implementation, next slide. If you decide to implement CEP, it will enable you with a tool to improve this. So with CEP, you will no longer have to record individual student information. This means you will no longer have a need for pins, card, and PhotoServe, all of those things I just discussed. You're allowed to just count each student who receives a reimbursable lunch or breakfast and report the total of number of those meals served. So another challenge, another solution with this is also for districts that do decide to have lunch in the classroom. I know this is very stressful for a lot of you, but I know some districts are discussing it. But this is also, if you implement CEP and your district does move forward with lunch in the classroom, it also will help the teachers in that it will eliminate the need to have a roster, and it will also eliminate the need to collect any cash or prepayments in the classroom, which is obviously going to make lunch in the classroom much more administratively feasible and efficient for the teachers. Next slide. Another significant issue is how to serve breakfast. And even before COVID, many districts were grappling with low participation in school breakfast programs. So for before school breakfast in many areas is just not working. And there are a very low number of students who are eating breakfast when you compare it to lunch. And again, similar to lunch, when schools open, how are we going to serve breakfast in a way that is efficient and sanitary, while also making sure that we're reaching the maximum number of students to participate. Next slide. So transitioning to CEP, it opens the door to breakfast in the classroom. And again, with traditional school breakfast program, checkoff rosters are required. And many teachers do not want the administrative burden of having to use checkoff rosters. And so this is a point where a lot of districts have gotten stuck with breakfast in the classroom. And again, with CEP, individual student names are not required. Only a total count of the number of reimbursable breakfasts consumed is required. Next slide. So as I kicked us off with for the webinar, meal charges is one of the hardest parts of our work for nutrition services. And unfortunately, many families do not qualify for free or reduced price meals. However, we know that their children are hungry and they are showing up and accessing the free meal program. And so they're incurring a meal charge. We're already hearing quite a bit in the coming school year with COVID-19. We can expect even more families to need meals, and the same may continue to be the case, and that many will still not qualify under the free and reduced price meals under the federal guidelines. So the potential for meal charges is even higher, I think, for this coming school year and the next few years. And those of you that have had to address meal charges and have a high balance, you know that a significant amount of time and effort is pulled out of not only your nutrition staff, but also school staff and school secretaries and principals and things like that often are involved. And it's a very, very, can be a very traumatic experience for everyone involved. Next slide. So again, this is another benefit of CEP, no more meal charges. For those schools that are able to implement, that effort and traumatic experience is no longer necessary. And from a financial standpoint, if you run the numbers, often if a school has very high meal charges, and even if their ISP is not at 62%, if the district is not collecting for those paid meals anyways with a high meal charge, it does financially make sense to move to CEP and due to the high meal charges. So there are definitely financial benefits as well. Another challenge, building off of the meal charge issue, is around stigma, and especially with elementary children, where many of them, the school lunchroom environment works better when everyone is doing the same thing and experiencing the same meals and the same environment. And unfortunately, a lot of students do feel a sense of stigma when they participate in the meal program. Students going through the line, and again, the staff asking for lunch money, they get uncomfortable. A barrier can be created when some students bring lunch from home and go right to the tables while others have to wait in a long line for school lunch. Often I've seen students who will just end up not eating and opting out, and then complain of hunger pains in class. And then I'm sure there's many of you that have had a principal bring that student down to the cafeteria anyways and say, hey, you know, this kid needs lunch. Can you please give them lunch? And then you wind up charging a meal anyways. So it's a significant barrier in many high need cafeterias. Next slide. So again, there are some great tools that CEP can open up for you to address this. and even to help build community. It can take away some of the barriers. So this is an example from Spring Integrated School District, I believe in Texas, where it's Pick 3 for Free initiative, I guess you would call it. And so they have embraced community eligibility by obviously providing free meals to those students who want to participate, but those students who do bring a lunch from home, just marketing the program in a way that they can still come through the lunch line and supplement an entree from home if a family is still wanting to provide something for their students. So for example, they would come through the line and get a milk, a fruit, and a veggie to supplement and round out their meal. So this is, I think, a really great example of how CEP can really be inclusive and help build community and bring children together. And so finally, I just want to put a plug for those schools who are, as Emily mentioned, not at the quote unquote magic ISP number of 62%. When you look at if you're trying to decide if you're going to implement CEP or not, you want to look not only at the number of students that are your identified student percentage, but you also want to look at how many more meals you could serve with implementing CEP, and then also implementing some of these other programs that I just mentioned, especially breakfast in the classroom. So if you look at not only your ISP, but then also look at how many more additional meals you could serve. So the example on the screen is showing an example of how one school implemented CEP and coupled it with breakfast in the classroom. I think most of the schools that I've implemented breakfast in the classroom, and I've implemented over 50 at this point, almost all of them end up serving almost as many meals and sometimes more breakfasts than they do for lunch. And so the increase in meals can be substantial. So even if you don't meet that quote unquote magic 62%, it is really important to make sure that you do consider implementing CEP at your school. So that concludes my portion of the presentation, and just put another plug that now is definitely the time to implement CEP. And next up is Etienne Melcher-Philbin from FRAC, who's going to speak on where do I start to implement CEP. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Zetta. That was wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name is Etienne Melcher-Philbin. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Food Research and Action Center. I'm so happy to see so many that are interested in adopting community eligibility for the coming year. As community eligibility can support both families and school districts as they respond and recover from the COVID-19 crisis, as it's done it also in years past every year, but especially now. As you think about next steps and getting district buy-in to adopt community eligibility, now that you've heard about all the great benefits, I do want to make sure that everyone knows about the nationwide waiver USDA issued, extending deadlines for election this year as it's part of its response to COVID-19. Usually the date to elect community eligibility for the upcoming school year is today, June 30th. But thankfully you do not have to make the decision by end of day. You now have more time to see if it's the right choice for your school district. And districts now have until August 31st, 2020 to elect CEP. Since CEP rolled out nationwide, FRAC's been developing a number of tools and resources to answer questions about the provision and build buy-in among stakeholders. To ensure success. Emily mentioned a few, and now I want to talk about a few of the grouping and financial tools that we developed and released this year that we're really excited about. And we developed the grouping tool to help school districts maximize the federal funding you would receive under community eligibility. So the tool is designed to provide strategic groupings for schools in your district. You can create an account on our website trackcep.org. And then you download the template Excel file, which here's the image below. And you just need school district name, school name, enrollment, number of identified students per ISP, and your ISP percentage. And you upload it to our system. And I should also note that while I'm walking you through this, you don't have to take notes. There are very clear directions on our website, and we're also available to offer TA throughout the summer. But if you upload it on our website, then you'll see on the next slide, the next step, and you can upload your file and you can select the low end of your ISP that you want. So, you know, we heard about that 62.5 magic number that you get free, but we know that there are many districts throughout the country that do it at lower, but we obviously want you to be comfortable with it. So playing around with those numbers so you can enter the low as well as that end range. And then the step value between 1 and 10 allows you to create groupings at different intervals from the beginning to the end. And so this is great to see if you want to see what's available for your district between 55 and 60, as well as, you know, on the lower end, 40 and 50, but there are different ways you can do it, and the tool will then maximize the groupings for you. Next slide. So like I said, you can compare multiple grouping scenarios with the tool and figure out what's best for you. We know that sharing these groupings and with the finances behind them can be very helpful in getting administrator buy-in. Since you can create an account, you can save all these different sets and see what works best for you as you continue with your conversations. And I also want to flag, you know, just because you can't adopt district-wide doesn't mean you can't adopt CEP in one school or a group of schools. And this tool can definitely help you think about partial implementation as well. We've seen a number of school districts do partial implementation successfully, and it's really all about great and clear communication to families. But this tool can help you do that if you want to, and also think about piloting in a few schools or one school and then expanding from there. But this tool we developed, and please check out our website. This is a bit hard to show through a PowerPoint presentation, but encourage you to go on and utilize this tool to help you maximize these groupings as well as your reimbursement mentioned. We also have 3 financial calculators that we developed to help you crunch the numbers. We have our CEP break-even calculator that will provide you with an overview of the participation rates required to break even on an average daily basis. You can use this for the entire district, single school, as well as a group of schools. So you can use it in different ways. And I'll show a screenshot of that in a little bit, but we do have our break-even calculator. And then we also have our CEP level calculator. And this calculator is designed to help you assess the financial considerations of operating community eligibility at the district level. You will need your district average daily attendance, your ISP. It thinks about your reimbursement rates, what your current meal costs are with food and expenses, as well as your hourly labor rates. You just follow the directions in the tabs and the worksheets will crunch the numbers for you. And then we have a school level calculator that does something similar, but at the school level. And you can put schools together in your groupings and crunch the numbers. It will also allow you to do numbers district-wide if you are partially implementing, and include your non-CEP school info. So that's something else to think about. It's not just for those CEP schools, but it is a district snapshot and plugging in every school's information. So encourage you to check out these tools. I'll show you, like I said, this is a bit difficult to share on a webinar, but if you show the next slide, this is what the calculator looks like. It's a spreadsheet, step-by-step instructions with tabs and plugging in your information to really crunch those numbers, to have those conversations with administrators. You can, as you can see, you can do it at the district level, and there are drop downs, and you can select school or partial. So these are really great tools and resources to help you have conversations. We know that this is a very big piece of the conversation when trying to get buy-in. And so, you know, having these numbers can really help you make the case along with all the benefits that Zeta mentioned. Next slide. And as you may have guessed, with all these resources that we've discussed, we do love CEP at FRAC. And so we have developed also a number of resources in addition to these tools. Our Take a Fresh Look at Community Eligibility, talking about the opportunity we have this year with COVID, with the increases in SNAP participation. I think sometimes the example Emily had mentioned earlier, what a SNAP increase could do to the ISP is really helpful, as well as the benefits. We have sample CEP PowerPoint slides. We know that you need school board buy-in too, and so created a slide deck to help you have those conversations, and No Kid Hungry's talking points and letters to administrators. We also have, we know that it's this can be a different conversation when you don't have 100% free claiming rate, and so have a lot of best practices and case studies of making it work with lower ISPs. And I know that many administrators have found it helpful to hear and see case studies from districts similar to theirs with enrollment and finances. So want to share those. We have a lot more resources at frac.org /community eligibility, as well as our financial calculator. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share our tools, but definitely encourage you to take a look at these this summer, and hopefully they can help you as you have these conversations, and hopefully in a place that you decide to adopt by August 31st. So thanks. And if you have questions about the calculators, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to provide TA throughout the summer on all these calculators.
Thank you so much, Etienne. That was wonderful. And I'm really excited to invite Jenny Arredondo from San Antonio to join us and share her school district's experience with implementing CEP and provide you another provider perspective. Jenny?
Hi, and thank you very much. And I do apologize. I didn't have any slides prepared, but I did want to make it a point to be able to join today. And just to give you just a real quick overview, SAISD has approximately 100 campuses within the district. We service just under 50,000 students. SAISD has been on CEP since the 2014-15 school year. I joined the district in 2016, and when I came on, we were very fortunate to be able to bring the district on 100%. So we are 100% CEP district. So of course, I do want to set the tone by saying that. And you know, for better words, we are sold. I mean, it's a wonderful option for our district, and I do realize that every district may have its own, you know, different circumstances and so forth. But you know, just some of the things that we know about CEP, you know, not having to burden families with application, as well as, you know, the administrative duties back at the office and not having to process and worry about applications has been phenomenal. Of course, along with that, we really don't have any charging or negative debt. And so all of those, you know, components really make running a program a lot easier and smoother, if you will. The way that I look at it is, it has allowed our department the ability to really concentrate on some other really important areas and not have to worry about all the administrative duties otherwise. And so what we've done is we've really been able to take a focus and have some really nice individualized campus feeding plans. And by doing so, you know, we've been able to achieve some really high participation rates at both breakfast and lunch. And so I can't speak enough about CEP. You know, obviously, again, there's going to be differences across the states and across the nations and some differences. But if given the opportunity, I mean, if your district or campus qualifies for CEP, I think the way I like to look at it is that there's a reason. And in our district, we have such high poverty rates that it is so wonderful that really our strategies are just around feeding kids and being able to improve our services and get that food in front of our students and not having to worry about the application process and money exchange, especially during this time of, the COVID period. Going forward, some of the eases that we will be able to experience as far as, punching in ID numbers or collecting money. We're very fortunate we will not have to worry about some of those items right now, especially during this time. So again, it's been a wonderful option for San Antonio ISD. We have seen great benefits of it. I can tell you we've got lots of buy-in from superintendent and the administrative level, as well as some of our teachers and community. It's a wonderful option for our students. Again, we know the poverty rates are high, and so we can focus on just meal service and meal programs and, strategizing on how to best get meals to our students. And again, we've seen some really high participation rates. So again, it's a wonderful opportunity in SAISD. I did want to comment that we did take a look at our ISPs early in March, and from March until June, we too have seen a slight increase. Of course, this is what is going on in the world today, we assume. But I really don't have anything else planned. I know, just really wanted to hear from a district. I'm not sure if there's any questions, but again, CEP has been a wonderful option for SAISD. If your district or even campuses within your district qualify, would certainly encourage you to take a look at that, just because of some of the flexibilities that it allows, and really dedicating and focusing on what we feel child nutrition programs should be, and food quality and strategizing on how to get food in front of our students. So that's really all that I have. I don't know if there's anything specific, Emily, that you'd like for me to discuss, but that's just a quick overview of SAISD.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing. And I'm sure there are going to be questions. We've already got lots of questions in, and I cannot believe that we are more than 30 minutes of Q&A time here. So awesome job to everyone, I guess, for sticking with the agenda. There's a first time for me for everything. Now we can get into Q&A, and I think we'll start with some of the provider questions for Jenny and Rosetta. If you might be able to talk about how you might handle adult meals under CEP. Would one of you be able to speak to that? Maybe Jenny first.
Can you give me some more around adult meals? Do you just mean like teacher purchases or that
I believe so. I guess the person asked, without cashiers, how would you handle adult meals at checkout?
Okay, so that is a good question. We, of course, have our point of sale. And so with the point of sale, we're able to collect money for teachers and or visitors in the cafeterias. In the classrooms, we do allow one adult meal where we cover the cost because the teacher is counting and claiming. So we do allow for one adult meal that the program does cover. So we necessarily do not have any cash exchange in classrooms.
Yeah, I would also add that with CEP, it doesn't eliminate the cashier. It just eliminates the need for the interaction with a pin pad or meal cards or a touch screen or anything like that. You would still have someone there double checking for a reimbursable meal, and then, with a clicker, or even some schools use a tally sheet. It really depends on, this is where you'll want to be in really close communication with your child nutrition coordinator from the state to make sure that they approve your accounting and claiming procedure. And that's going to be required when you submit your CEP documentation. You have to document exactly what you're going to be doing and get approval from them. And generally they know your district and your environment and setup, so they'll be able to give advice and TA on what's allowed, but it certainly doesn't eliminate the point of sale and the cashier.
Thank you. And there's been lots of questions on counting and claiming, and I think this is obviously a hot topic right now, the no having to punch in student ID numbers or swipe IDs. I'm sending in the chat the CEP Planning and Implementation Guide from USDA. It's a long guide, but on page 37, there's information about counting and claiming. And so I do, Zetta, thank you for saying to check with your state agency, because I do know that some state agencies have different requirements for how they interpret this part of the program. And so FNS doesn't require individual point of sales and tracking by student. Again, you only need to count the total number of meals served, but as Zetta said, you have to have your plan for how you're going to count and claim meals to make sure you're not double counting meals or giving more meals than allotted per student. And so you'll have to work through that with your state agency. I know that at least last year when I had a CEP webinar, Arkansas State Agency said that they did not allow just a tally on paper or a clicker. So there are some states, again, that do things a little bit differently. But nationwide, FNS does not require that individual identification of which student takes a meal. And so you can see that language on that CEP guidance. I think that's a really helpful planning guide regardless. It's easy to use the table of contents and filter through and answer questions you may have. So see that in the chat. And let me pull up our Q&A again. And if there are still questions, go ahead, Zetta.
Yeah, I was just going to add while you're scanning the Q&A, I think it's probably, I also want to just clarify that the counting method and tally sheet does work well for elementary because there's generally just one lunch line and one cafeteria or one point of service during a meal period. But if you have a middle or high school where you're going to have grab and go or multiple points of service in, let's say, just one meal period, that is a case where you would still have to collect student information and PINs to ensure that there was not a double meal count. Because there's no way that you could tell during one meal period if, let's just say, a high school where they're all released all at once, one meal period, and you've got like 6 grab and go stations, the USDA will require you to collect student information at that point. But again, with COVID-19, if you can come up with a way to ensure that there's no way for students to mix, or if they're like all in the classroom and not moving around, then your state may approve your counting and claiming to just use a count. And I think that would probably be the case because it's already approved for breakfast in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've seen school districts who count the number of meals that they have. If they're, for example, doing a grab and go where you can just grab a reimbursable meal and head to the classroom, they'll count the number of meals and compare that to student attendance to show, and then compare the number of meals that are left over and compare all that to their tally to have a sort of double check method to say, we prepared this number of meals, served this number of meals, this coincides with our tally and doesn't exceed our attendance for that school that day. So again, your state agency might help you think through some of those plans, and really great flag that some schools have lots of meal service going on at different times, and making sure you don't double count gets a little trickier than in other settings. If you still have questions about, yeah, Jenny.
If I could just add, and those are great points, and I'll tell you one of the things that we do in San Antonio is when we're assessing that to see what method works best, really that is it a controlled environment? And so the example that Zetta gave, 6 grab and go station, the bell rings and they all run. And so I think that, in my opinion, with the upcoming school year, based on everything that's going on, I think that might be a little bit of a different scenario this year, whereas students will most likely enter school buildings and leave classrooms more in a staggered fashion, where that might lend itself for some of those methods that Zetta did explain. So that's a great point.
Awesome. Etienne, I'm wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about some of the wisdom that FRAC has around operating CEP with lower ISPs. Someone wrote that they expect participation to be lower this year. And so since they're not expecting a big increase if they were to adopt CEP in terms of meal participation, how might they make up for funds that they can expect to lose if their ISPs are a little bit lower? In this example, the ISP is about 43%. So are there any strategies that you would recommend, and this can be for all panelists too, on how to kind of offset some of those costs you might incur from operating CEP at a lower ISP? You're on mute, Etienne, sorry. The phrase of 2020.
The phrase of 2020. And I'll echo with another phrase of 2020. I think things will be a lot different next school year than in years past. But thinking about, with a lower ISP, we do have quite a few strategies that a lot of the presenters have mentioned of like making it work. But thinking about innovative delivery models, I think that really helps maximize participation and increase participation. We know that that could also be lunch in the classroom this year, but also implementing breakfast in the classroom if you haven't already done so. Really thinking about your daily participation and tracking this. So identifying unpopular items and avoiding menu fatigue, I think this gives you the ability to adjust menus to ensure strong participation. Thinking about student engagement. Just again, these are a lot of strategies, every year to increase participation, but I think even more so now with community, if you are going to implement community eligibility and try to, maintain a strong program next school year, thinking about how to engage students with their preferences, taste tests, just getting them excited, different meals, also making sure if you are adopting CEP at the lower ISP, if it is the first time, making sure that your community knows about the program, that this is an important resource. Families are going to be recovering from the impact of COVID for quite some time. And so making sure they know about that meals are free at school and that it is available. So I think, some of the strategies that we think about all the time of maximizing participation, even more so when thinking about community eligibility. But like I said before, next year is going to be different than so many. So I think it's just, tracking and continuing to have conversations with your district, as well as, engaging those students in the conversations as well.
Thank you so much. Anyone else have anything to add to that one? The only thing I can think of is if you're going back with a blended model and you don't have all of your students at school next year, thinking about now that waivers have been extended for students schooling at home, how can you, if you're operating a non-congregate meal service now, how can you kind of take lessons learned and best practices from the non-congregate service you're operating currently and make sure you're reaching all of those students who are at home? So whether that's leveraging bus routes, since we know those go through every community and every household, if it's a lot of community locations where it's easily accessible to people, considering their transportation barriers, if any exist, for them to come up and pick up meals. So also thinking not just about the kids who are going to be in your school, but how can you make meals available and serve meals to students who might be schooling at home some or all of the time at this upcoming school year. Anything else that Zetta or Jenny you'd like to add to this one?
Yeah, I think just to echo what you were sharing is just, I mean, yeah, you can serve the meals. You can serve meals to those on campus, but for those that are distance learning, you can, when they're on their way out on, if they're on campus Monday and Tuesday, if they're on their way out on Tuesday, you could potentially provide a bag with meals for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Again, I hate to sound like repeating myself, but you definitely have to check with your state and make sure that it's approved. But I know that that is what some districts are planning to do. to be able to maximize the number of meals. I think probably at the end of the day, I mean, unfortunately, yes, we are going to have less students participating because of the challenges of them. We know at least some of them will not be on campus every day. And so we do know that there will be a drop, but I think at the end of the day, you have to look at, are you going to serve more meals under the CEP, or would you serve more meals under the standard claiming? And then look at the numbers, the financial impacts from that viewpoint.
Great. An easy one to answer. ATN, we got a question, will the calculator link be shared afterwards? We have the links to those. We will share those afterwards. You will also get a copy of the slides and this recording. Another question, and this is kind of an interesting one. I may have missed something at the beginning. If we don't meet the ISP, but we do have a high amount of uncollected meal charges at the end of the year, is there another way to implement CEP? We've been trying for a while. So that 40% eligibility threshold is a hard cutoff. If you don't make that within your school or within your group of schools, you can't operate CEP. There is an option called Provision 2. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Provision 2. We have a resource I can share too in the follow-up about, it's a comparison chart between CEP Provision 2 and non-pricing. So those are 3 different ways to serve universal free school meals. And Provision 2 doesn't have that eligibility requirement. And so if unpaid meal charges is a big problem for you, I've heard districts go Provision 2 for this reason exactly. They don't have high ISPs, but they're constantly racking up a lot of school meal debt at the end of the year, that it would actually be better for them to just pay for free meals through Provision 2 and kind of figure out non-federal sources of funding to make ends meet. But it actually ended up working out in their favor because it was less burden at the end of the year than all of the unpaid school meal charges that they'd incurred in previous years to cover those costs. So Provision 2 might be an option for you if you're really not able to implement CEP. And this, I also recommend Provision 2, again, using these calculators and these tools will help you figure out financially what works best for your school. But Provision 2 does require in your base year, your first year of your cycle, to administer school meals applications and count and claim meals by fee category. So there is an administrative burden that isn't there with CEP, especially in that base year. But if your percentages of participation under Provision 2, so you claim meals by the percentages of meals that you serve to free, reduced, and paid students and claim for the next 4 years based on an average of those percentages, if that percentage ends up looking way higher than what your ISP reimbursement percentages would look like, Provision 2 might make more financial sense for you than to try to make CEP work at a lower ISP. We often see that where schools are serving a high immigrant population that might be not enrolled in SNAP and federal programs out of fears for immigration and negative impacts on immigration status. Also sometimes in more rural conservative areas where there's a higher stigma associated with participating in some federal programs, that the ISP isn't really a great proxy for their actual school's need. So I will share that resource. Anything else to add, panelists, on that? Okay. And we have some questions about the Pick-3 Free initiative that Zeta shared from Spring ISD. And I believe that this is an initiative that you can only operate if you are operating offer versus serve. And that's where you offer all meal components to students, and then they can at lunchtime deny 2. And so this strategy enables students to come through, and the way they branded it was you have to pick up a fruit, a vegetable, and a milk. So pack your entree, come and select these in our offer versus serve setting, and that would count as a reimbursable meal. So that, yes, one of the questions was, is that reimbursable? Yes, if you're doing offer versus serve. If you're not doing offer versus serve, I don't believe you can just serve those 3 components to students, but our actual operators here, Zeta and Jenny, could you confirm?
Yes, that's correct. You would have to offer it all the full components, and then they choose the 3. That's my understanding as well.
That's actually something we've encouraged. We don't have a whole lot of students who bring meals from home, but if and when they do, that's certainly an option that we offer them.
Right. Yeah, I've heard, you know, how do we reduce stigma in our school and encourage all students to participate in the meals program to, again, combat that stigma. And I thought this was just a really fabulous idea for that, is have every student go through the line if you're doing a line with offer versus serve, and just encourage this branding, send it home to parents. Don't worry about packing a full meal. Pack the entree, we'll take care of the rest. Just unique and creative strategies that schools are using to make sure that kids feel welcome and able and accessible to participate in the school meals programs, and that there's no stigma for doing so. So if you're doing offer versus serve, could be an option. Okay, so does anyone have any examples of how CEP might adversely affect Title I funding for a district? And does anyone want to take this one first?
I would check in with your state agency about Title I. Every state handles this in a different way, and we know that states have adjusted policies to ensure that CEP doesn't negatively affect Title I funding. But we have a few resources on our website and can share it. I think it'll be in the follow-up email of our state-by-state chart, but I would definitely check in with your state agency about how Title I interacts with CEP in your state.
Yep. Again, CEP wouldn't impact the level of Title I funding given to your district because that's determined by census data. Might have implications for how your district decides to allocate Title I funds to schools within a district. So you're still starting with the same amount, but they might divvy up that Title I allocation a little bit differently if schools are adopting CEP this year in a district. There was a question about food allergies. Can Zeta or Jenny, can you talk about how without school meals applications, you're able to track for food allergies during CEP, if you're operating CEP, and make sure that students aren't taking meals? I know sometimes POS systems flag, hey, this student is lactose intolerant, but they came through the line with the milk. How do you assess and still capture food allergies without school meals application?
That's a great question. And the current POS system that we use helps us to identify, and we've actually have gone to an electronic form in the classroom, whereas teachers are no longer having to shuffle paper or check meals off. What they're doing is they pull their class roster up via their laptop or even their cell phone, and they're able to click on the student's name when the students receive a meal, and if and when that student has an allergy, it's highlighted. So it actually helps teachers inside the classroom to be able to identify those students via the POS system. We also have a departmental protocol, whereas, you know, we flag and, you know, tag and so forth, just so that it's easily identified by our teachers. We've got a really good work and rapport with we're fortunate where we have a campus nurse in all of our schools. So between our own department protocol and the help of our point of sale system, that's how we identify our students in the classroom.
Sorry, was I on mute? There we go, that phrase of 2020. So there was a question about tools to calculate ISPs. That's done at the district and school level, usually through the process of direct certification, and every school is required to do direct certification at least 1 time per year if you're operating CEP, at least 3 times per year if you're not. So your school district is already doing direct certification, and there are definitely strategies to improve that process at the state and local level. So again, that's working with your, conducting it as often as possible through the state system, extending the household eligibility and sibling match. So using your rosters to compare addresses to see if you have other students living in households that aren't flagged to be included in the ISP, and you're including them. Working with your homeless liaison or your McKinney-Vento liaison, working with early Head Start directors if you have them, and making sure that you are accounting for all of those data sources on that original slide, which is SNAP, TANF, FDPR if it's in your state, Medicaid if it's in your state, and foster care, homeless, migrant, Head Start, early Head Start. Zetta?
I would also add, depending upon what point of sale provider you have, many of them have a matching tool or software that you can purchase that will do the match for you. And most of them will show that, you know, the cost of the tool will pay for itself in the additional students that it's able to match. So then you're not having, you know, your staff with these, you know, crazy spreadsheets and hours of data matching. You can access a tool through your point of sale provider to do it for you.
All right. I think that we've been able to answer all of our questions. There was one specific to Illinois that I'll have to get back to you on, to the person who asked that question, and I will follow up. Otherwise, thank you all for joining today, and speakers and attendees for a really great discussion on CEP. Again, we're here, No Kid Hungry and FRAC are here to support you through our resources and tools and technical assistance. So stay tuned for the recording and slide deck so you can access all of them. And just thank you for absolutely everything that you're all doing to make sure that kids are being fed at this time. And I know that it's no easy task, and it's just incredible work that you're all doing in school food service right now. It's really an honor to be working in the field right now, and really hope that you're all proud of all the things that you've already accomplished and will as we look to a new school year. Again, here to help if you have more questions about CEP. Really encourage you to consider it. It's a great opportunity this school year, and we'll be in touch. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.